Well, hello and welcome to The Point. My name's David Flavel, and whether you're watching at home on the internet, or whether you're at The Point at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning or 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon at Hexham Primary School, we're delighted to see you. Our church is designed for those who don't yet come to church, for those who aren't yet Christians, and we hope that we present the good news of Jesus Christ in a simple, straightforward and easily accessible way. If we don't, then let us know and we'll try and do better. This week we're in the middle of a three-part series. We're looking at the story of Ruth, Naomi and Boaz, who all fit together in a story from the Old Testament. The middle one this week, we're looking at Naomi. Later on at the point, we'll be sharing in bread and wine. And if you'd like to do that at home, then if you have some bread and some grape juice or whatever you can find, then you too can take part in what we do. But for now, let's get on and recap the story from last week. Naomi has a husband and two sons, and they live in Bethlehem, which is just below Jerusalem on this map. You can see the star in the pink kingdom of Judah. But there's a famine in the land, so Naomi, her husband and two sons moved to the kingdom of Moab, which is the purple kingdom to the right of the Dead Sea where there is food. And while they're there, the two sons get married to local Moabite girls, and then, unfortunately, both Naomi's husband and her two sons die. So she's left with her two foreign daughters-in-law on her own. So she decides to go back to Bethlehem, and her two daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, tell her that they want to go with her. But she says, no, you can't, and she insists. So eventually what happens is Orpah goes home, but Ruth on the left there does go back. So the two women head back to Bethlehem, which is where Naomi is from. Which brings us to our Bible reading. Ruth 1, 19 to 22. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" She obviously looks a bit different, and maybe the hard time she's had has made her look a little more haggard. But how will she respond? When they ask her, "How are you doing, Naomi?" she could say, "Mustn't grumble, feel fine," a very sort of stoic view. Or she could say, "Well, I've had a really hard time, but I know God is with me, so all shall be well." But she doesn't say either of those things. This is what she says. "Don't call me Naomi," which means pleasant, she told them. "Call me Mara," which means bitter, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. So if you ask Naomi what she thought about God, she's very clear here. God has made her life bitter. She went full, but he has made her empty. He has afflicted her. He has brought misfortune upon her. And if you ever feel that God's out to get you, well, Naomi certainly felt like that. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. The Bible is full of real people, not plaster saints. At this stage in the story, you could be forgiven for thinking that there was no hope for Naomi, because she certainly saw no hope for herself. She looked at her situation and she called herself bitter. She was honest. She was angry with God, angry for what he'd taken away from her, angry for what he had done to her. The Bible doesn't gloss over the realities of life. All human life is there. But Naomi does get transformed. How does this happen? Well, by the love of her daughter-in-law Ruth, things change. Through a long series of incidents which we're looking at in more detail next week, Ruth meets Boaz, who turns out to be a really good man. And Ruth and Boaz get married, and then what happens is that she has a child. Let's read what happens to the transformation of Naomi as we move on to chapter 4. Ruth chapter 4 verses 13 to 17. So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. And what they're saying here is that for Naomi, her future is ensured and hope is back, because she has a guardian redeemer, somebody who will look after her in her old age. She has, in effect, somebody to protect her, which she didn't have before, because her son would grow and be able to work and be able to earn in a way that daughters couldn't in those days, and he would be able to look after her in her old age. And then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So Ruth becomes part of the line of David, which goes on to become the line of Jesus. So this is a very significant birth. But for Naomi, what's happened is that all that is past, all the suffering that has gone on, all the lack of hope, she now finds that hope has come again, but not through her actions or through her faith. You can argue who the real hero of this story is. You might say it was Ruth, with her loyalty and her devotion to Naomi and her love and care. Or you might say it was Boaz, who, even though he's in a position of power, acts with great virtue and grace. But you would not say that Naomi is the heroine of the story. She's bitter, she has no hope, and then hope comes. But not through any action of hers, but through the love and care of those around her. Which brings me to my questions. Number one, is Naomi right to blame God for her troubles? If the question had been, does Naomi blame God for her troubles? The answer is absolutely she does. And we see it 4 times with those 4 different statements about how God has afflicted her. But is she right to blame God? Number 2, if you were one of the women, say, can this be Naomi? Who is it? What would you have said to her when she came back to Bethlehem and said, I'm not Mrs. Pleasance anymore, I'm Mrs. Bitter? What words would you have said? And number 3, does she deserve to have hope? Naomi has no hope at the start of the story. She's filled with hope at the end of the story. But does she deserve it? I'll give you a few minutes if you're at home just to put the video on pause and have a think about that. Whereas if you're at the point, either in the morning or afternoon, then get yourself a drink, sit yourself around a table and have a discussion. If there's any question that you have which you think is better than these, then please feel free to offer that first, because we don't want to miss out on any of your questions. Otherwise, we'll group together and then we'll get back to you in a little bit. Well, I hope those questions proved interesting to you. In a moment, we're going to share bread and wine together. But first, let me give you my takeaways for this week. So what must we do? Well, number 1, don't be like Naomi. She could have seen her misfortune as bad luck, or maybe a consequence of her own actions and choices, but she saw it as God's fault. And sometimes bad things happen to good people, and when they do, we shouldn't really blame God. It's a very human response to do so, but it's not right. Number 2, we should be like Ruth. Ruth was better to Naomi than 7 sons. She was so caring and thoughtful and loving and loyal. And maybe there's somebody we can be caring and thoughtful and loving and loyal to this week as well. And number 3, we should be like Boaz. God's plan for redeeming Ruth and redeeming Naomi and changing and transforming their lives is partly accomplished when Boaz shows completely undeserved favour, kindness and unconditional love to a foreigner. It's his grace and love that's part of the transformation. And maybe this week we can pray that God will give us a heart like Boaz, so that we too can show the love and care of Jesus to others. And that brings us to sharing in bread and wine. I said last week that the story of Ruth, Boaz and Naomi is sort of a prefiguring of the story of Jesus. It's sort of like it has clues in it which show something of the love of Jesus. Boaz shows undeserved favour and love and grace to somebody who didn't really deserve it in Naomi, and somebody who was foreign and had no claim in Ruth. And in the same way, by dying on the cross for us, Jesus showed undeserved favour to those who didn't deserve it, like me and you. and to people who were far away from God's grace at the time. So as we share in bread and wine just now, I invite you to remember what Jesus has done for you. And if you're not yet a Christian, to realise that he died for you even before you knew it, even before you were a Christian. Jesus died for you, and his love is there to redeem you and to make you new. So whether you're a Christian or not, then do share in the bread and wine, and remember what Jesus has done for you.